Hello and welcome everyone. We are about to start the webinar on the ITIL Maturity Model, but let's allow another minute or two for everyone to join. I see that the number of participants is still growing. It's always a mystery for me why for a digital meeting it's impossible for everyone to come in just at once, but we will have to wait for more people to join. Still many are in the queue to the virtual hall. You are supposed to be hearing us well now and to see the deck with the title of the webinar. So let's make sure that you hear and see us. And in a minute or so, we will be starting. So please bear with us, don't go anywhere. I see that more people are still joining. So let's wait another minute or so, and we will be starting very soon. Daryl noted that chat is disabled. That's correct. So our Q&A section is open for you. Please do ask your questions during the webinar. We will take some of them at the end live, and we will also be answering what we have time for during the webinar by chatting back to you. But please use only the Q&A section. The chat is disabled. We do see your comments and questions and the Q&A, and we'll be responding to them. Okay, I see that the numbers of participants is still growing, but it's slowing down. So, and it's 2 minutes past, so let's start. Welcome everyone to this webinar on the ITIL Maturity Model. We will be presenting it together with my colleague Dmitry, and Tatiana will be helping us with the chat and handling your questions and probably with the live questions in the Q&A. My name is Roman. I work as a senior architect of ITIL. So if you don't like something in ITIL content, and if you don't like something in the way ITIL Maturity Model is designed, I am probably the one to blame. If you do like something in ITIL and in Maturity Model, there is a list of contributors at the end of every publication. All these things have been produced by teams, not single-handedly. I've been working with Axelos and then PeopleCert for almost 9 years now, since 2016, and largely involved in what we now know as ITIL 4. And I'm happy to introduce my colleague and friend Dmitry, who is going to present significant and probably the most interesting part of today's slides. Dmitry.
Thank you, Roman. Welcome, everybody. I'm particularly glad to be part of this team and to work to deliver this webinar. I used to be an IT consultant for over 15 years before I joined PeopleCert. Currently, I'm responsible for our partnership program from a product management perspective. So I'm responsible for the benefits that put inside of this program and how they productize, how they packaged. And I try to use my business experience, my consulting and advisory experience to do my job here. Today's session is all about ITIL Maturity Model. It's one of the maturity models that we own as PeopleCert. And we will explain basic things about what maturity is, what maturity model is, why we believe that my maturity model is a valuable tool for businesses and how to use this, so that you have a clear understanding of what it is and for which purposes it was designed. Let us start with the introduction section right away. And let us start first with definition and explanation of what maturity is and why we believe it matters for organizations. So why I believe that some explanation is needed here, because when applied to organizations, maturity is a bit of an abstract characteristic. It's not something that could be easily measured. It's not something that could be easily observed when you just look at how people work and how they communicate with each other and other stuff like this. It's more of an abstract thing. And generally speaking, a high maturity score doesn't necessarily mean that the organization is a top performer. It's not about performance directly. It's not about effectiveness or efficiency or other stuff. You might look at it pretty much like we look at the grades our kids bring home from school. We understand that they don't directly reflect their knowledge. They somehow connect it, however, and high grades, and especially consistently high grades over time, usually mean that kids doing well with their learning. And the same kind of logic could also be applied to maturity and businesses. So maturity scores are linked to business performance in pretty much the same way. So the definition of the maturity presented on the slide, let me just break it down to smaller pieces so that we can really well understand it. So maturity is a measure of an organization's ability to deliver predictable outcomes, including some things that are presented on the slide. And the general statement, the major statement on the slide, like the higher your maturity score, the more likely you are to achieve your organizational objectives. Before I jump to some details about this connection, before I jump to some figures about this connection, let me focus on this very important statement here. More likely you are to achieve your organizational objective. It's not an algorithm. It's not a guarantee. It's like a statistical connection between these two things: maturity of organization and its ability to achieve organizational business objectives. So this is how these things are linked to each other. Now, why we believe this is true, why we can say these things. Several research studies conducted globally over like past couple of decades show a strong positive correlation between IT governance maturity and some key business performance indicators presented on this slide. Namely, its return on assets, because company better uses resources with well-established governance system, its return on equity, and for commercial IT providers, for commercial IT service providers, it's also profit per employee. So there is a statistically meaningful connection between IT governance maturity and business performance metrics. And IT governance is one of the part that is covered by ITIL Maturity Model. Few words about this later. We will explain how exactly ITIL Maturity Model is structured and which different aspects it could address and help help measure. So exact figures depend on the context. We understand that statistics is a science that should be applied to real-life cases with some level of accuracy. But general statement, we do believe that higher your governance maturity score, the more likely you to achieve your business objectives. And one important thing I would like to emphasize here, that it's especially true for organizations operating in a changing environment, because if you operate in a stable environment, nothing is going to change, then your current modus operandi might be quite effective, even if you don't have well-established governance function. But mature governance increases the likelihood that the organization can adapt to the changes and keep its edge. So this is how we explain what maturity is and why we believe that maturity matters to organizations. Roman, please add something if you want. Just interrupt me, or I just will proceed with the next slide. So why we measure maturity? We can identify 5 major reasons for this. First, to help organizations identify areas for improvements to achieve their strategic objectives. Quite obvious thing. The second is to focus investments, because in many cases organizations have plenty of ideas what could be improved, and we need to prioritize things based on its business impact, based on our expectations from this improvement initiatives. And maturity assessments, like something that could be conducted based on the ITIL maturity model, can help focus this investment and prioritize the most promising, the most important business things. The third reason is to monitor the progress of improvements that has already been initiated in the past, and we are currently observing how organizations, how our organization work with those, and which results we have been able to achieve. Um, then to understand how an organization's maturity compare to those of other organizations, something that is called benchmarking. If we have data enough to compare ourselves with peers, with other similar companies, similar in terms of geography or industry or scale or whatever, then it could be also another thing to pay attention to. It's not a major thing. It's not something that could really shape our decisions about our business, but this could be also some information to take into considerations. And finally, and this is something that is more specific to ITIL maturity assessments, and again, we will provide more information about this later in this presentation, is to obtain a formal confirmation of the organization's ability to act as an effective service provider. And this is called certification because one of the options organizations conducting this assessment have is to certify the assessments, to have a formal certificate coming from PeopleCert confirming their maturity maturity level. And we will explain the certificate and this option a little bit later during this session. Now, what is the ITIL maturity model and why we believe that it's reasonable to measure organizations' maturity with the ITIL maturity model? In short, in very brief explanations, the ITIL maturity model is a tool that organizations can use to objectively and comprehensively assess their service management capabilities and the maturity. Capabilities of their management practices and the maturity of their service value system. So from this definition, I would say that it should be clearly seen that ITIL maturity model is not only about ITIL, it's about how we manage things, how we govern things. It's not about how we follow ITIL guidelines. So it might be applied to other companies that probably believe in other gods and use other frameworks to establish and improve their management and governance systems. And the second thing, ITIL maturity model is not only about maturity. Essentially, ITIL maturity model could also be used to assess capabilities of individual practices that company use to manage to manage things. So it's not only about ITIL, and it's more than only about the maturity. Now, some key features, key benefits of the ITIL maturity model. First of all, it's based on ITIL. ITIL is the most widely used ITSM framework, ITSM set of recommendations about how to establish and manage ITSM systems in organizations. So people trust ITIL across the globe, and people trust the ITIL maturity model as well because it is part of this framework. It is used to use this framework and reach valuable benefits for businesses. The next thing is that ITIL maturity model is quite a flexible thing, and it could be tailorable, and it could be tailored to specific circumstances of companies in terms of what needs to be assessed, how needs to be assessed. So it's quite flexible assessment model, and companies we work with, companies our partners work with, because essentially it's our partners who deliver assessments, maturity and capability assessments to end customers. They see this, they recognize this, and they praise this model for this level of flexibility, and they value that it could be tailored to their specific needs, not just an assessment provided by a rigid solid statement, solid and rigid checklist. And finally, ITIL Maturity Model is a holistic model. So it's not only about processes, it's not only about actions that need to be taken. It addresses all four dimensions of service management. And the dimensions of service management are processes and workflows, organizations and people, tools and technology, and partners and suppliers. So all these four perspectives, all these four dimensions are holistically addressed in the ITIL maturity model and are being analyzed during the assessments our partners perform for for foreign customers, for enterprises. This is the very important disclaimer, and let me reiterate this and said it again, that although the ITIL maturity model is based on the architecture and key ideas coming from ITIL, it's not about measuring your adherence to ITIL. It's not about measurement how compatible or compliant you to ITIL. It's not about this stuff. It's about how your service value system works, how your management practices work, how they fulfill your objectives and targets. And this is what the assessments based on ITIL maturity model are devoted to. And ITIL is just a source of recommendations and a source of ideas and the source of the structure for this assessment, but not something that is being assessed. What is being assessed is the management and the governance system of an organization when it comes to managing digital services and products. We have three different types of ITIL maturity assessments, and Roman will a little bit later come to stage and provide you with more details about this. But just to give you a brief explanations, a high-level understanding of this, we can use the ITIL maturity model to conduct capability assessment, and capability assessment is only about assessing practices, individual practices. You can actually assess any number of practices from 1 to all 34 practices which are currently part of ITIL, the ITIL framework. And it's ended up with a statement of results saying stating the capability level of the practices that have been assessed during this assessment. So it's about capability, how we work in terms of specific individual management practices. The second type of assessment is the maturity assessment, and maturity is more an organizational characteristic. It's not it's not a characteristic of a specific practice. It's a characteristic of how our organization works. So what is being assessed during maturity assessment? Service value systems, including up to 6 practices, 6 out of 34. So it doesn't seem like a really big number. Continual improvement practice must be included in the scope because continual improvement is one of the major components of the SVS, of the service value system, and it has to be assessed in order to come up with any statement about the organizational maturity. And it ends up with a confirmed statement, again, statement of results, confirming the maturity assessment that we have been able to measure during this high-level maturity maturity assessment. And finally, the comprehensive assessment. And comprehensive assessment is the most thorough, most robust way of assessments that we have, and most of our real-world assessment being done as comprehensive assessment. Comprehensive assessment combines both things. So it's about service value system assessment and also a thorough assessment of a decent number of practices. More than 7 or more practices need to be included in the scope for the comprehensive assessment. Continual improvement is one of those for the reasons I explained before. And for this particular type of assessment, for comprehensive assessment, the certification is available. Again, few words about this a little bit later. We can provide and assessed organizations with a certificate confirming their maturity level and stating the scope of this assessment. So these are some examples, some ways of how the ITIL maturity model could be used to assess businesses. And finally, finally, I mean, in the introduction section, some brief information what our customers say about this model and their experience coming from working with this model. So we are not going to read every single word here, but some major statements. For example, like the ITIL maturity model assesses much more than individual processes or individual practices. It's about assessment, the management system, the governance system. It provides insights into all 4 dimensions of service management, and it's much more than just assessing individual processes and practices. The second statement here, that this assessment provided us with the objectivity and validation we needed to gain deeper insights into our ITIL practices and be able to improve these practices over time. So it's all about focusing on something that could be improved. It's also about stating the current achievements, especially if this particular company initiated some improvement progress some time ago, and now it's time to understand where we are, understand our progress, measure this progress, and report on this progress to our stakeholders and customers or whatever. Yeah, and finally, just the like more generic statement from University of Birmingham. I would highly recommend the maturity assessment to anyone considering it. So this is something that comes from end customers, from enterprises being assessed by our partners. And we will circle back to this idea, how to run this assessment, how to order this assessment, who can conduct this assessment for you later in the final part of this slide deck of this presentation. And now I will invite Roman on the stage. So let's discuss it in a little bit more details. What is capability assessment? What is maturity assessments? What's inside? How it's performed? And what you should know about these things. Roman, please go ahead.
Especially given that we already have questions in Q&A asking for clarification between capability and maturity and what is assessed and how is it assessed and where can you find criteria. Bear with us, I will tell you most of it and then Dmitry will tell you the rest. So let's start with capability assessment. And first of all, I will explain in plain words for those who are not with ITIL for many years and don't speak ITIL language fluently, what we are talking about. Long ago, our service management systems described in various sources, whether it's ITIL, COBIT, ISO 20000, or CMMI for services, were mostly built around processes. So when we were talking about management systems, we were talking about a collection of processes. Since 2019, since the release of ITIL 4, ITIL refers to all those managements, incident management, problem management, change management, you name it, management, as practices. And it's not just a change of the word, it's the recognition of the fact that in order to successfully manage something, so in order to develop a management capability, to manage your incidents successfully, or to manage your changes successfully, or to manage your capacity and performance of your services successfully, it's not enough to define a workflow. It's not enough to define a flow of activities and information from inputs to outputs. It's also important to identify and develop respective skills, maybe supported by some organizational solutions. It's important to identify how information flows through these activities and how we can use technology to enable those activities. And it's important to identify and manage the way we depend on third parties and we involve third parties in those activities. This is why each practice in ITIL, and we have 34 practices, and they are described in practice guides, which are available by subscription through membership. Each of these practice guides describes the 4 dimensions that I just listed: processes and value streams, information and technology, organization and people, and partners and suppliers. You may refer back to so-called 4 Ps: people, process, partners, and technology or products, but in this case, technology is more relevant, to remember the 4 dimensions. And each practice guide describes all 4, and processes are among them, so they are not removed, but we are looking at more than just a workflow. Hence, practices rather than processes. So each practice guide describes one of these management capabilities which are relevant for digital products and services. And each of these practice guides, among other things, includes so-called practice success factors, PSFs. So, for instance, in case of incident management, the PSFs are, and these are factors that are necessary regardless of how exactly you organize your incident management. We believe they are necessary for success of incident management practice, or in other words, for the incident management practice to be able to fulfill its purpose. And the purpose of incident management is described in terms of minimization of the damage from incidents or negative impact of incidents. So in order to minimize the negative impact of incidents, we have to first detect incidents as early as possible. Second, resolve incidents as soon as possible. And third, learn from our practice of detecting and resolving incidents and continually improve our practice in order to detect earlier and resolve better. So let's assume these are 3 PSFs. It's not the exact wording for incident management, but it's important to understand that each practice guide includes PSFs. And then when we were designing the capability criteria for assessing individual practices, and that's exactly what capability assessment does, it assesses individual practices, we mapped those criteria to the practice success factors. So if you look at the next slide, we will see that we defined 5 capability levels, and capability assessment, again, is about individual practices. So these levels are from rather familiar. If you used ISO 20000 or CMMI or COBIT, you will find very similar levels, very similar grades, from practice being largely performed ad hoc and not being well organized, to practice being continually improved and improving the management system it is a part of. So the first, and it's important, the first dimension of the use of this maturity model is the capability assessment. So to be honest, the fair name, the correct name for the model would not be ITIL Maturity Model. If we were going for a very correct name describing what it actually is, we would say that this is ITIL-based ITSM capability and maturity model. It would never sell if we put this on the cover. So what we have on the cover is the ITIL maturity model, but as Dmitry already said, it's important to remember that we are not assessing the maturity of following ITIL or the adherence to ITIL. We are assessing using ITIL terms, using ITIL structure, using ITIL practices, using ITIL guiding principles. We are assessing how well your practices are performing and how likely it is that your practices will be fulfilling their purpose and their individual practice success factors, even if something changes, if people are changing in your organization, if the circumstances are changing. So how reliable is the delivery of the practices expected outcome and fulfillment of the practice's purpose? And the higher the level of capability, the higher the assurance that the practice will be fulfilling its purpose, even in the changing circumstances. So for each practice, we have these PSFs, and linked to the PSFs, we have these 5 levels. And for each level, we have a set of criteria. And all these criteria are also mapped to the 4 dimensions that I mentioned. So each criterion is linked to either organization and people, or value streams and processes, or information and technology, or partners and suppliers. Can we proceed to the next slide, please?
Yeah, just a second.
Okay, so these capability criteria are defined, as I said, for all PSFs and for all levels, actually only for levels from 2nd to 5th. So as you could have seen on the previous slide, level 1 is describing a situation where the practice is performed ad hoc. It's not organized well, or maybe at all. So it's really hard to define criteria for level 2. Sorry, for level 1. So we assign level 1 if only some of the criteria of level 2 are performed or fulfilled. And if none of the criteria of level 2 are fulfilled, then we don't assign even level 1. There will be a slide explaining how this works a couple of slides later. So we created this list of capability criteria, and we put them in the materials that were originally only available to the accredited consulting partners of Axelos and then of PeopleCert. So only accredited consulting partner could use the capability criteria to assess practices of their clients. That probably is one of the reasons why many people haven't even heard of this model, despite the model being available for 4 years now. However, when we were updating the practice guides in 2023 and 2024, we, during that update, among other things, added the capability criteria to each of the individual practice guides. So if you are not a consulting partner of Axelos and PeopleCert, you can still use capability criteria from the practice guides. As I mentioned, they are available through membership, and the membership is about £100 per year. And for that money, you actually get access to all our publications apart from 2. So not only practice guides, but also all the core publications. And in terms of value for money, this is the best way to get ITIL, to get access to ITIL. So you can, for as much as £100 per year, have access to all the practice guides. You can open a practice guide you are particularly interested in. You can find chapter 7 in every practice guide, and there will be a one-page description of the self-assessment process. But more importantly, there will be a list of capability criteria, and you can also find some recommendations on how to, or some information on how to actually make sure that you meet those criteria if you apply recommendations of the rest of the practice guide. So each practice guide has this list. They are mapped to the specific practice success factors and to the 4 dimensions. Importantly, each capability level is based on the achievement of the previous one. You can jump to level 4 without fulfilling criteria of level 3, or to level 3 without fulfilling criteria of level 2. Let's have a look at the next slide. And if you select a number of practices, you can actually measure the capability level these practices are currently at. We will explain in a few words how exactly it's measured and what are the rules. Some of the rules that I already briefly mentioned are currently on the screen. So if, for instance, so you will start with level 2, since we don't have criteria for level 1. We start with level 2, and let's assume for convenience that we have, 8 criteria for level 2. So if all 8 criteria of level 2 are fulfilled, and you think that they are all met, then you can safely say that your practice is at level 2. How exactly you assess each criteria and how you can gather data and evidence for that, Dmitry will tell you in a few minutes. If only 4 of 8, or more than 4, but not all 8 of the criteria are met, then we say that this practice is currently at level 1. So half or more of the criteria, but not all criteria of level 2 are met, which means we are still at level 1. In order to say that the practice is at a certain level, all criteria of that level should be met. If less than half of the criteria of level 2 are met, then sorry, it's not even level 1. So we don't even say that the practice exists as such. So it's rather strict rule, but it helps us to avoid this blurry assessments and make it more objective. And if you assess multiple practices, you can create a beautiful spider diagram like it was shown on the left-hand side of the slide. Now, practices is just one component of what ITIL calls service value system. There are 5 components in ITIL service value system. If you are not familiar with ITIL terminology, the relevant name for this would be the ITIL governance and management system for your digital services. So since we recognize that governance is an important component of the system, but we cannot call it management system if it includes governance. Governance and management should be separated. So we say that this model includes governance and management, and you can more or less safely say that everything that is not governance in this model is part of the management system. So 5 components of the service value system, as ITIL calls it. Guiding principles, there are 7 of them, and this is I believe, is a good example of how this model is not about measuring whether you meet ITIL requirements or whether you do ITIL well. So the criteria for guiding principles are not referring to the ITIL 7 guiding principles. They are referring to some guiding principles that your organization defined for itself and follows. So if you do have a set of guiding principles which are recognized by people in the organization, which drive decisions in the organization, which are subject for review and update, maybe not too often because they're very high level, but still they are questioned and confirmed or updated as needed, then you can say that the guiding principles component of your service value system is there, and the level of individual maturity of this component is high. A similar criteria defined for governance. If there is a part of the corporate governance that is focused on governance of IT, and it can be based on ISO standards such as 38500, it can be based on some other sets of criteria, but we define the 5 levels for maturity of these components, similar to the way we define them for practices. Maturity scale will also be on the screen soon. So you can measure whether your governance is mature or less mature. The service value chain criteria are focused on the interaction of practices and the end-to-end management of value streams. Although it belongs to the service value chain component of SVS, it's largely focused on whether your organization is managing interaction between practices in particular value streams well, whether they are identified, whether you are managing end-to-end flows well. Management practices are in the part of maturity assessment is a function from your capability assessment. So in any maturity assessment, you define which practices you will include. More on that in a few slides. And the results of the capability levels of those practices will define the maturity level of the collection of the practices here. And finally, continual improvement is a very important component of the management and governance system. And we assess whether you do continual improvement, whether you apply it to all other components of the management system, whether you apply it to the practices, whether you apply it to products and services, to all the 4 dimensions at all levels from strategic to operational, and how mature is your continual improvement practice. If it's ad hoc and we just occasionally decide maybe we should do something, or whether it is an institutionalized and communicated practice and it drives improvement of the whole system. Depending on this, it will be assessed at different levels. And then we have the overall assessment of all 5 components, which brings us to the integrated maturity level of the overall management system. So before I proceed to the levels, we can come back to the levels for a moment, sorry. Just to make it clear, because there were a few questions in Q&A. Capability assessment, individual practices, maturity assessment, the overall governance and management system, including selected individual practices. And the number of practices and the scope of practices you select for your comprehensive assessment is up to you. We only mandate certain number of practices to be included in order for the assessment to qualify as comprehensive, at least 7. You can do all 34 if you have resources. It's unlikely it will be justified, but technically it's possible. And if you decide which practices to assess, there was another question in Q&A. For instance, if you are focused on transition part of your management system for some reason, because you are head of transition, then you may select practices such as change enablement, release management, deployment management, service validation and testing, service configuration management, IT asset management, maybe something else, in order to assess what is important for your scope of attention, for your scope of responsibility, for transition in this case. So you can flexibly select what to assess. And that's an important difference between the ITIL model and some other. For instance, in ISO 20000, you are expected to assess all processes in the service management system. In ITIL, you can be more flexible depending on what is your current focus of management and therefore of assessment. And this integrated maturity level of the overall system is calculated based on the maturity assessment results for individual components. And it's a very simple rule. The overall, there are no averages or any weights or anything like this. The minimum level, or let's say the maximum level achieved by all 5 components is the level of the maturity of your system in general. So in this example on the slide, we see that we have level 2 of maturity assessed for guiding principles in service value chain. And although other three components are assessed at higher levels of maturity, the overall system will be assigned level 2. Because all 5 components are equally important, and the lack of maturity in one of them actually slows down or lowers down the overall maturity of the system. This caravan moves with the speed of its slowest member. So our overall maturity is a function, and very simple function, of the maturity of the 5 individual components. So if we conduct maturity assessment, although, as Dmitry already mentioned, assessment of individual capabilities is possible. So if we conduct overall maturity assessment, we should include all 5 components. We can still decide which practices we include there. To ensure valid representative assessment of the practices, we include at least 7 practices, and we mandate one of this selection, which is continual improvement practice. So you can select any number of the practices starting from 6. But even in the transition example that I just provided, it will be more than 6. Continual improvement practice is included in all assessments. And other practices depend on what you want to know about your management system. Next one. When you select the practices, you can define some of them as primary for whatever your purposes for assessment today are. Using the same example with transition. So if, for instance, you think that the most important practices for successful transition of your services is change enablement, release management, deployment management, and service validation and testing, you can include them as primary. But you think that service configuration management, IT asset management, and knowledge management or risk management are also very important, but they are not direct contributors of your transition. They support your transition with information, tools, methods, but they are not participating in the actual workflow directly. In this case, you may have a reason to treat them as supporting practices. What's the difference that appears from this choice based on this choice in your actual assessment? The primary practices have higher targets. So to calculate the overall maturity of the practice component of the service value system, we take individual capability levels of the practices, but we treat primary and supporting practices differently. And to put it simple, you can have your supporting practices at two levels below from your primary practices when we calculate the overall level of maturity for the practice component in the service value system, as illustrated here. And this is about the structure of the model, and this is what we can assess. Individual practices in any combinations from 1 to 34, and if we assess more than 7, then we can make it part of maturity assessment. Maturity assessment is focused on the 5 components of the service value system: guiding principles, governance, continual improvement, practices, and service value chain. And you can, again, select whether you want to assess the system overall, maturity, individual practices, capability, or both. Only the combined comprehensive assessment, which includes both maturity and capability, can be certified. Smaller scope assessments still can be conducted, but we don't validate the results, or we, PeopleCert. How you can conduct an assessment? These recommendations are quite universal regardless of whether you are an official consulting partner or you are doing it for your practices for yourself as a self-assessment. And Dmitry will tell us the key steps and some secrets of conducting the assessment?
Uh, just a few words about the assessment process and some recommendations regarding how to conduct these assessments in real life. So four major stages of this assessment can be identified. The first one is scope and plan. It first is about scope definition, and all kinds of assessment scope is king. You really need to understand this organization. You really need to understand how to scope this assessment in order to bring some value and in order to focus on something that is most relevant and the most relevant, and spend your time and effort there. And I have some like more detailed scoping recommendations just literally next slide. So we will discuss this topic a little bit a little bit better, because it's really important. It's really important thing. So you define the approach, which type of assessment you are going to conduct, the capability assessment, the high-level maturity assessment, or the comprehensive one. And you decide on mobilization plan, who is going to be involved, which is time scale, that sort of thing. Then the first assessment part comes, which is desk study. It's review of the frameworks, it's review of the documents this organization have, like policies, plans, procedures, that sort of thing, explaining how organization is intended to work. And it's also review of ongoing work records. It could come from automation system. It could come in forms of written papers, like meeting minutes or whatever, something that tells you how this organization really works. And you can compare these things, and you can identify some questions to be asked to members of this company. And this desk study part essentially doesn't provide you with any real answers. It's really to find good questions. And the next stage is observation. And observation, when you work with this organization in terms of interviews, in terms of meeting participations, when you actively interact with people and you have this opportunity to ask your questions. And the better you completed the desk study session, the desk study stage, the better you're equipped with to proceed with the observation state. So you have some specific questions, you understand whom to ask these questions, you understand how to verify answers based on the data you have access to. This will allow you to make a thorough and robust conclusion for these organizations and find some really good recommendations, because the major thing is not only just to state that you are at this maturity level, but what is really expected from consultants and what differs good consultants from mediocre ones is if a consultant able to by knowing this organization, by understanding this organization, provide really valuable and actionable recommendations how to improve and emphasize those areas where improvement is mostly needed. And the final stage is report and closure. It's drawing conclusions in form of report. This report often, always, I would say, is going to be presented to your customers, and it's subject to discuss with them, because they also need to understand this report. They also need to accept your conclusions and understand your recommendations, in order this report might become an actionable thing, something that is going to help this organization, something that they can use to initiate some improvement activities in the future. So you present this report, you discuss this report with your organization, regardless of if whether you are external consultant or internal consultant. Still, you work pretty much in the same way. Some more detailed scoping recommendations. So two types of scoping statements here. First is organizational context. So it's really important to understand why does this organization needs this assessment, who and how is going to use the results of this assessment, and why this assessment might be needed right now, not tomorrow, not yesterday, but now we would like to find answers to some of our questions, that sort of thing. So we need to be able to answer this question: why does this organization needs this assessment, and why this is going to happen right now? Also, it's a great idea to understand if there was some previous assessment and we need to take a look at those assessment and understand some conclusions and some recommendations from the assessment report so that we can refer to this information so that we can check the organization's progress towards the targets outlined in these reports and be more specific in how our organization is evolving over time, not just to provide a snapshot that is about current state and time. And the next really important question is which entities, which organizational structures are going to be assessed, because it's important to understand that when we assess practices and end-to-end processes, many organizational entities are involved in this, and it might not be practical to assess only small, tiny fraction of this organization because this wouldn't tell us much about how this organization really works. It could be somehow more or less uh, um, uh, uh, representative if you're assessing just capability of individual practices if this practice is mostly focused on in this team, but it certainly will not be enough if you are trying to understand the maturity of these organizations. So it's really important exercise to understand, depending on what is going to be assessed, who needs to be involved in this assessment, who is going to be evaluated during this during this engagement. And functional context, the optimal assessment type, high-level maturity assessments, practices capability assessments, or comprehensive assessment, which practices are to be assessed. And for this, we have the ITIL Maturity Model provides some specific guidance. For example, we have something that is might be called like objective cascades, which connect some primary focus of business, some business objectives that might be specific to this strategic focus area, and some practices that are most likely to support these business objectives and be like primary or supportive practices. For example, obviously, if your organization is mostly focused on resilience, some practices become more important and you should treat them as primary practices and some other practices become supportive. Or if the organizational agility is more important for your organization, the picture would change. So we have this guidance inside of ITIL Maturity Model, and you can use this guidance to shape, to scope your maturity, to tailor it to your specific organization, depending on its needs. And also a good idea is to ask which services or project or work streams are to be assessed, because in many cases, especially when we are talking about a large organization, geographically dispersed organizations, different part of these organizations might work differently. And you need to understand this that diversity before you commit to conducting this assessment, before you provide some estimates in terms of time or money or effort or whatever. You need to understand which part of this organization need to be assessed individually because they might work differently. And you need to understand this difference in order to come up with a relevant and valuable conclusion for these organizations. So these are some important questions that need to be asked and answered during this scoping exercise. Assessment deliverables, what is going to be provided as the result of an assessment? First of all, it's a statement of current achievements. If it's not the first assessment, the results can also be compared with previously agreed improvement goals so that we can measure, so that we can understand and communicate the progress of these organizations. The second thing is more or less mandatory is areas for improvement. So what exactly could be improved and what exactly should be improved for this organization. And these recommendations, these areas of improvement can be prioritized, for example, based on risk analysis, based on connection to current business situation. For example, if we are going to procure our other businesses, we need to be better in terms of how we incorporate new teams in our management and governance system and how we make them an integral part of our daily work. So we need to understand this in order to be able to prioritize the different improvement initiatives and explain this prioritization to the customers, to the decision makers. And critical success factors key conditions that must be met in order to succeed with this improvement program. If agreed, we can also provide, or consultants can also provide other things like, for example, benchmarks or an improvement roadmap outlining the stages and the timelines for the stages in order to proceed with the current state where organization is right now to the target state where this organization wants to be. Running an assessment, as Roman previously mentioned, we have a specific type of partners which are called accredited consulting partners. And currently, the official assessment, especially the assessment which ends with certification, the official assessment can only be conducted by one of our accredited consulting partners. We provide them with access to this model. And what is most essential, it's not only just providing them with the access to the model itself, it's also some educational process. So we help people really understand this model and how to use this and how to apply this, because one of the most important things when it comes to all assessments and models like this is consistency. We need to be sure that different people assessing organizations using our model are guided by the same ideas, are guided by the same structures, by the same processes. So we need to better understand how to use this model. And for this, we provide special education for all assessors, and we accredit them based on some qualification exam. If you are end customer, then this is a link for you where you can find a link of our accredited consulting partners so that we can proceed with the assessment. And the final slide here, we are almost out of time. The final slide here is assessment certifications. So formal certification is available if an assessed organization wants to showcase an official confirmation coming from PeopleCert of its ability to act as an effective service provider, for example. It might be relevant for customers, for shareholders. So it could be accompanied by certificate like this. To certify an assessment, what exactly we do to certify an assessment? We review the key findings and evidence coming from the assessor, and we validate the assessment report. So for us, it's like a small engagement during which we pay attention to what has been assessed and what information has been collected during this assessment, and we discuss it with the assessor. We validate this in order to come up with the final conclusion about this assessment. Only comprehensive assessments are subject to certification, and the maturity certificate provides a clear indication of the assessment scope. So you might see on the example of the certificates presented on the slide that a specific list of practices is presented here, just to be absolutely clear about what has been assessed and what is the what is the scope to which we can apply the statement about the organizational maturity. So that's pretty much it about the assessment, and I would like just to briefly outline key takeaways from this session, and then we can proceed with your questions and probably answer some of those. So first of all, the ITIL Maturity Model is a tool that organizations can use to assess their service management capabilities and the maturity of their service value system. And the primary purpose of this assessment is to support improvement planning by identifying areas for development and tracking progress over time. Although the ITIL maturity model is based on ITIL 4, it is not designed to assess the extent or success of the implementation of ITIL guidance, and can be used with other ITSM frameworks, other approaches, other beliefs people stick to. The ITIL maturity and capability assessment can be delivered by one of our accredited consulting partners, but even if you are just acting on your own, you can also conduct a capability self-assessment for your company, because all the capability criteria are included in ITIL practice guides available through the PeopleCert Plus membership subscription. So this subscription would be enough to have access to all practice guides, to extract capability criteria from those, to create your Excel table, you work with your organization, and to conduct the capability assessment on your own. Maybe because you would like to proceed on your own, or maybe you would like to become better prepared for the next step, and the next step might be a joint assessment conducted with one of our accredited consulting partners. These are the major things we would like you to take from this session. And maybe we have some time for questions and answers. And some of those questions actually arrived at us before this webinar, so we put it on the slide. Roman, we still have 1 minute. Should we proceed? You're on mute. Yes.
Not anymore. I have an alternative suggestion. Based on lots of questions that we have in Q&A, we currently have more than 100 questions open and
more than 100, yeah.
About 60 questions already answered. So we will walk through all your questions and we will publish a follow-up blog or some sort of document addressing most of them, including the two on the slide. I wanted Dmitry to answer just one most popular question that appeared maybe at least a dozen of times during this hour. Can you briefly explain how this model relates to other models such as ISO, CMMI, COBIT, and the like? Why would someone go for this rather than others, and what are the key similarities and differences?
Well, could I
In 1 minute.
actually scroll down to this slide just 1 minute? Because this is the way how I would answer this question. So the key 3 characteristics of this model are presented here. So first of all, it's based on ITIL. It's highly trusted source of recommendations for ITSM, and this source is used for the ITIL maturity model. Secondly, is much more flexible. It's much more tailorable compared to, for example, ISO 20000 and compared to, for example, CMMI. It's not only about processes, it's not only about activities, it addresses all 4 dimensions of service management: processes and workflows, organizations and people, tools and technology, and suppliers and partners. All these 4 areas are addressed. Yeah.
Okay, that will be the shortest version of that one. Thank you, everyone. We have to, since we already exceeded our allowed 1 hour of time, we are very happy that it sparked so many questions. We hope it was somewhat informative and interesting. We are happy to follow up. There were many questions about how to become an assessor, or many questions about how can I conduct assessment myself. We will address them in a blog or other similar publication. We will share the slides and the recording with you very soon, and we will follow up with a link to the answers to the most popular questions in some text format that we will publish somewhere on our website. So please stay tuned. We will come to you at least twice with follow-ups to this 1 hour session. And thank you very much for your presence, for your attention, and we hope to see you at the following ITIL webinars and other events. Thank you very much for being today with us, and thank you to Dmitry, Tatiana, and everyone who has been working behind the scenes at PeopleCert to make it all happen. Thank you and have a very good day.
Thank you and have a very good day indeed.